What is up, everybody? Welcome into the NFL Combine here in Indianapolis. This is Shout, a Buffalo Bills football podcast brought to you by Tops Friendly Markets. As always, great deal. Pick up the weekly ad. Go check out everything that's on sale. You were just actually looking it up, Alaina.
Yeah.
Great job. They got a breakfast sale going on.
Mm-hmm.
You can find all of your elite party options at Tops Friendly Markets. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm great. Alaina Getzenberg, ESPN, joining us here from the Indiana Convention Center, where we got a chance to talk to Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott over the last couple of days. We're going to get into all of that on this episode of the podcast. How's your week? How you doing?
Oh, thank you so much for asking. That's so nice of you. um, Good. I think it's nice to kind of be in this environment where all the coaches and GMs talk and get to hear from all these different people. And yeah, it's a long week in Indianapolis, but we're having fun and it's warmer here than in Buffalo, so we'll certainly take that.
So I think coming into this event, getting a chance to talk to Brandon and Sean, which we just talked to 3 weeks ago, there wasn't going to be a lot of big revelations necessarily, but I think one of the topics that rose to the top of everybody's list is this James Cook contract situation. He's been very vocal through the media, going on podcasts, going on Instagram Live, $15 million per season. And to me, hearing from Brandon today, one of the big takeaways was we might not be on the same page now, but who knows what the situation is going to be in a couple of weeks, months, years, because listen, this thing could get played out beyond next season. What's been your big takeaway on the whole James Cook front, hearing from Sean and Brandon?
Yeah, well, so earlier we saw the Khalil Shakir deal get taken care of, obviously in that same draft class. I thought it was interesting when we heard from Brandon Beane today that it was a lot of years. Like you said, it was like, even if we're not at the same place right now, it could be in weeks, months, years. And when years is brought up, it tends to make you think, there's less rush for a deal like James Cook than obviously getting Khalil Shakir's taken care of. So it doesn't mean, like Brandon Beane said today, that they won't or they're not, but he pretty much basically said they're not in the same place right now. That, James Cook's camp and the Bills are not in that same place because, well, the Bills don't want to give him $15 million a year, understandably so, because that's a lot of money. So yeah, I think the takeaway from that is that yes, they're interested in James Cook, but it has to be at the right price, and they're not there right now.
I want to get more into Cook, but before we get there, let's dive into Khalil Shakir's extension. So it's $60 million over 4 seasons. The Spotrac.com market value for him was actually quite a bit more at about $77 million. So Brandon Beane, as he tends to do, gets a bit of a team-friendly deal. And I want to ask you about that because I think it's in the eye of the beholder whether or not you think that number is a team-friendly deal. I personally think it is. I think if you look at Khalil Shakir, you see the 800 yards receiving last year, and you say, okay, what's the benchmark for receivers? 1,000 yards in receiving. But he finished second in run after the catch, which is something that Brandon Beane has coveted for years, finally finds that person. Do you have a problem with the number? And I think, what do you make of getting him under contract long term when you have a couple other of options that they could have gone with to cover first?
I thought it made a lot of sense. Like, I think getting Khalil Shakir taken care of is logical. I think it fits what this team does with this draft, develop, and re-sign. And Khalil Shakir is like a chief example of that. A day 3 guy who's been a Josh Allen loves throwing to him, trusts him. He was throughout the season not only like statistically led them, but like he had Josh Allen trusted him clearly in a way that a lot of the other receivers on this team he just didn't. And I think that's so important. You want players that Josh Allen trusts for him to throw the ball to, and that's Khalil Shakir. And that's why I think getting this taken care of, I have no problem with the amount. I think it made all the sense in the world to get this one taken care of for both sides. I think Khalil Shakir, from talking to him over the years, really likes Buffalo and is enjoying obviously playing with Josh Allen, because really who wouldn't as a receiver. And I think it makes sense. I think, we'll get into these other guys and getting these deals done, but as a part of this offense, and he can still grow. Like, I think we've seen him progress each year. So I don't think it's out of the question at all to see him grow next year and to have him under contract. Like, he's just a solid guy. Like, that locker room loves him. Like, they really do like Khalil Shakir. So I think this one made sense for both sides, and the amount I think is fine. It's a lot of money, but it's also like it makes sense to get that one taken care of and kind of move on to the next one.
Josh Allen usually gets off of the radar for at least a little while after the season ends. But if you follow him on social media, you saw as soon as they announced this deal, he shared. This is a guy that he wanted a part of the mix. And it was interesting hearing Brandon talk about what this potentially now means for Khalil Shakir and wanting more from him from a leadership perspective.
Yeah.
And not that he isn't a leader, but he's a little bit more of a quiet leader. This kind of puts him in a different category and somebody that I think they maybe want to be a little bit more vocal. I think that he is a piece to this thing. If you take him out and his reliability, to your point, it changes the dynamics of the offense quite a bit. And I think this contract right now, I think it's 23rd overall in wide receiver average annual salary, right?
There, yeah.
In a couple of months, in a year or so, he's going to be outside of the top 30.
Yeah.
There's going to be value on this contract for years to come, and he's going to be somebody that you rely upon for years to come at 25 years old.
Totally. And he is like, I mean, we can attest to it from covering this team. Like, he is a guy that doesn't shy away from talking. Like, if something needs to be said after a win, after a loss, like during the week, he is a pretty reliable guy in that respect. Like he did talk, Brandon Beane did talk about him being a leader. I think we've seen signs of that from Khalil Shakir, but he can certainly do more. And yeah, it sounds like a big number. It looks like a lot, but when we're really looking, I mean, he's under contract now through 2029.
Yeah.
That's a long time. And so really over that time, yes, it sounds like a lot of money, but it really, once you spread it out and the cap, as we've seen, is really only going up. It's really not that much for a guy who I think can really continue to have a big role on this offense.
It was interesting too. Brandon said, "You do this deal in part because maybe there's some benefits to the cap this year."
Yep.
So he's going into his last year of his rookie contract. He obviously hit some escalators last year that was going to change the math for this season. So I think what this does is probably bring that cap number down this year. You'll probably see it kind of blow up in the next couple of years. This is one of those kind of guys that you're going to want in the mix. You can kind of keep pushing it down kicking the can down the road, like they're probably going to do with Deion Dawkins, Taron Johnson, a bunch of other players this offseason.
Yep, taking care of someone like Josh potentially this offseason and maybe extending him. They've got some contract work to do before this league year starts. They've got some money to clear, and that's the kind of deals that I think we can expect to see from them. These guys that are long-term parts of this team. Like you said, Taron Johnson, Deion Dawkins, they're not going anywhere. They're key members of this organization, and I think Khalil Shakir completely fits that and makes sense what they're doing going forward. And like you said, Josh Allen reposted immediately. It's got the quarterback seal of approval, and that's a really key part of it too.
The thing too is, like, this is a position that was wild. That was wild. So this is a position.
We're thriving.
We are thriving. This is a position where, and this specific contract is one where people are just laughing off to the side. This is a podcast. We're not doing like a stand-up. We can have some fun with this. Yes, the one guy just walked right in front of our shot. Like, didn't come on in. Come on in. Come on in. Yeah, we're having a party. Hey, I was like, oh, there's Danny. Yo, the biggest movement in Buffalo sports media right now is GDAR. And what it means is give Dom a raise.
Everyone to advocate for Dom Tibbetts to get a raise.
Look, he looks like he's actually going on a presidential tour right now.
That might be my next career.
At Matt Beauvais, so he can hear about this.
Exactly.
Yes.
So that was fun and really just took this podcast to the next level. So if you think about this specific contract in the pile of contracts that Brandon and his staff are thinking about extending this offseason, you have Terrell Bernard at middle linebacker, Christian Benford at cornerback, Greg Rousseau, and then on we talked about James Cook a little bit.
Yep.
I think this contract probably was the easiest to get done because it was a palpable number for the position. I mean, you're going to see guys at the receiver position probably signing T. Higgins, potentially if he hits the market, at $30 million per season. This is half of that. And this position, you look at linebacker as a position, maybe you can get Terrell Bernard at a contract that you can stomach handing out.
Yeah.
The Greg Rousseau extension is really complicated. The Christian Benford extension could potentially be complicated depending on what he thinks his value is. I think his value is higher in a place like Buffalo than it will be outside of Buffalo. But if he thinks he deserves a certain number, maybe they don't land at a spot. If you're projecting this offseason specifically, what do you think is the next deal that gets done?
That's so kind of how you outline it is what makes it so difficult, because I do think, like, to me, like, when I immediately think of it, I think Terrell Bernard is the natural, like, he was a one of two team captains last year. He's clearly a very important part of this defense, both from a leadership perspective and also, like we heard, maybe he's doing too much. You know, Sean and Brandon Sean talked about it, how, like, you know, Terrell tried to do a lot because he took on a lot of responsibility this year.
Sorry, I was just laughing because Mike Catalana walked right in front of us and just like this. Just waved right to the
We're
camera.
really thriving.
Yes, go ahead. Hey, thank you. Appreciate it. Respect.
But I think Terrell Bernard is kind of similar to me to Khalil Shakir, that like it makes sense for both sides. I don't know what his value will be outside of this organization. Like, is it as high? I don't know. He's earned a lot of respect in Buffalo. So that to me is one that makes sense to get done. But that is a tricky number for your starting middle linebacker. Like, how much do you want to pay him? And he wasn't perfect this past year. Like, he had some moments that I thought, he wasn't quite as strong as he was the year prior. So that's a tricky one, but it would make a lot of sense to me to get done because of what he means to this team, and that, like, if he's not there, like, they've got some major leadership problems on defense because he's the clear leader. And if you take him away, there's other guys that will step up for sure. But there's no one to me that quite stands out like Terrell Bernard, that's like the captain of this defense, because he's got that personality. So I think he's really important and makes sense to get done here.
If you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel as well. If you want to take your Bills content experience to the next level, sign up to become a Shout Buffalo Bills Insider. It's 24/7, 365 access to Ryan Talbot and Matt Parrino, 716-528-6727. Send that number a text. Get yourself signed up. 2-week trial, $3.99 a month after that. And listen, it's really big. Are you an insider?
I'm not, but
so I got to tell you a story. I knew you weren't, and that's why I was setting this up. You know who's a big insider?
Tell me.
Sal Majorana from the Democrat and Chronicle in Rochester.
Yeah.
He's always texting me. He has my personal number.
Sure.
So he's a subscriber to the text line, and when I send out text on the text line, he texts me to my personal number about the text that I send out on the text line, and I tell him, dude, you could just respond in that, and then I'll respond. Like, he's like, no. Asshole, you're my friend.
Whoa,
so there you go. Listen, this is a not safe for work podcast sometimes, so you can kind of.
Well, I'll have to listen. I've heard really great things about
this
experience.
I appreciate that.
So I might have to just sign up myself to get all the inside tea about the Buffalo Bills from you and you know how much I love Ryan. So how could I not?
You like Ryan more. You were a little disappointed when you found out that he wasn't going to be on this episode.
I was. I love Ryan.
Yes. He is better looking.
He is better looking. True.
Yes, and listen, you can
even
see
the hair. He's got better hair.
You can see your reflection in his dome every single time. All right, so moving right along. So one of the big takeaways from the end of the season, and in our positions, we observe the kind of conversation going around about this team within the fan base, and I think one of the things that's been I don't want to say alarming, but obvious, is the approval rating of Brandon Beane seems to be dipping for the first time in a long time. And I think there's always been a conversation about, Kyer Elam has been somebody he's been criticized heavily for. But you take Elam, you take a down year for Dalton Kincaid, and then the end of the season for Keon Coleman, we can get into that a little bit. And it feels like people are starting to be a little bit louder about Brandon Beane's performance early in the draft. So I asked him about that today, and his answer was, listen, I'm always going to be critical of myself. Even if you were to get this great impact in year one from a guy, I'm still going to want more because that's just how I operate. But he also did kind of come back and say, listen, you got to let this thing play out a little bit for guys like Kincaid, for guys like Keon Coleman. They're young, they're developing. The Kyer Elam experience, that's a whole different conversation. Where are you at in terms of how much Brandon Beane should kind of have in terms of why this team hasn't gotten over the top?
So I think you have to almost take each one of those separately, because yes, there's been these past 3 years where their first pick, we're looking at this past season, didn't contribute maybe to the expect that they wanted or that they should have with a pick you're investing so highly in. I mean, the Kyer Elam one just hasn't worked out. There's that one just has not worked. And I do think they take responsibility for that. They traded up to pick him. It just hasn't worked. It just hasn't. 3 years in, you can say that it's not working and that it might not work out. I think he would be better off elsewhere. They would be better off. I don't
trade cut either.
Cutting him probably not, because why not have him as depth and he doesn't cost them. Relatively, I'm okay with keeping him, but he's certainly someone I would trade if I'm the Bills. I just think for both sides, to be honest. And he might end up staying and he'll be a backup and they'll do this one more year. We'll see. But to me, it's complicated because I think it is partly this front office's fault and Brandon Beane's fault, because he talked about today when he was talking about Keon Coleman how he's 21 years old and you got to give him time to develop. Well, they drafted him knowing he was 21. You know, that he's a young kid, that he's going to be 21 this first season, that he's got to have room to develop. But you needed contributors. This team is competing for Super Bowls. You need people who can contribute now, and I think they haven't done. I know Brandon Beane said that he really liked Dalton Kincaid's first season. I thought he could have done even more his first season, and then we just haven't seen him quite be that first round pick that they drafted him to be. So I think they have missed on these guys so far. That doesn't mean that, you know, Dalton Kincaid could have a great third season. Totally. Keon Coleman, he could totally like take a big step forward his second year. But as we're standing here right now, it just hasn't worked out to the way I think they need it to. When we're looking at these other teams, like you look at the Eagles and their drafting, they've had so much success getting contributors at all stages of the draft, and the Bills have done that at times. But to me, like the early rounds just haven't hit in the way that they need to kind of maybe take that next step. Like I think it's really important.
There's been some early round hits. Like I don't want to forget about like James Cook as a guy that was kind of an afterthought when they drafted him. He's been really important.
Yeah, and that took till his third year, right? Like I think that's a good example of like his first 2 years were okay, but then this third year he exploded.
Osiris Torrance, I'd put him in that bucket as well. And I also think that when we have this conversation, there's this frustration, rightfully so. Listen, fans can have their frustration with anything. I don't really push back on that too much. But I would remind people, like, not every GM is finding a franchise right tackle in Spencer Brown in the third round of a draft, or a potentially all-pro cornerback in Christian Benford in the sixth round. You have to kind of balance it out with that part of the conversation. But that, with that being said, what makes the Keon Coleman situation even worse, like you mentioned the Eagles. If you go back 4 or 5 years, they really missed out on a elite wide receiver in Justin Jefferson, taking Jalen Reagor in that draft, right? And that makes it worse in that spot. For the Bills, you have Xavier Worthy, who had a really good first season, Ladd McConkey, who had this really good season, Brian Thomas Jr. For a team that's traded up twice in the first round in the last 3 drafts, to me, if the Bills trade up to go get Brian Thomas Jr., what does that look like for this offense, finding that missing piece? I just think that hindsight's always 20/20. It's easy to kind of call the shots from where we're sitting. But I do think, I agree with you, they have to find an impact player, especially on the defensive line in this draft. There's no other way to put it.
Yeah, I think it's somewhere in between, which is like not a fun social media thing, where it's like they have had some success drafting. There's all these guys they draft, develop, resign. So many of these guys have come from Brandon Beane drafting, finding these guys on day 3. There's a whole list of guys we could go into. But it can also be true that, like, lately there's been some early round frustration with a lot of guys that I think to me it's also trading up to get these guys where you're really investing in these picks and those haven't worked out. Like, I think that's a little, it's a little more complicated because you really believed it was worth moving up to get these guys. And some of them aren't working out quite to the level you'd like. And again, I wouldn't be surprised at all if we see, Dalton could have a really big year this next year. And then I think everyone's talking about that pick differently. And that's just kind of how it goes. We have to, so it's somewhere in between, which like is not great for social media. Like it's always like, it's got to be one way or the other. But maybe that's the reality of it,
You went behind this time. That is big news. If you're watching right now on YouTube, hit that like button, subscribe as well. Real quick, what are you doing on Saturday? This Saturday.
I don't
when
have
do you get
any
back?
plans for Saturday yet.
Big wingnut show.
Ooh, I do love wingnuts.
At the new location on Genesee Street.
Oh, I didn't know it was open.
By the airport, just open,
wow.
Soft launch. This is our first live show there.
Exciting.
So come out this weekend. If you have nothing going on Saturday, it's going to be a big combine wrap-up show. And you're going to be excited because Ryan's going to be there. So
I do love Ryan.
That would be a chance to see him. And we're super excited about that show.
Time.
It'll be a fun time.
Yeah.
All right. Before we get out of here, I asked you on the way over here, what's your big takeaway from talking to Sean and Brandon so far? And I'm going to turn the show over to you.
That's very scary.
What are you thinking?
Here's the thing. From coming away with this, like kind of like you said at the start, there was nothing that was like, oh my gosh, shocking or whatever. One thing we did talk about that I think is worth bringing up is Brandon talked about today how kind of, trading this, how they traded that first round pick to get Stephon Diggs. To me, his response was so like, totally we'd do it again.
Right.
Like we would totally do that. And I think it is when you're drafting where the Bills are drafting again, not till 30, it's really kind of like second round players they're looking at, right? You're not going to probably, if you're sitting at 30, it's very unlikely you're going to get someone who's got a first round grade on. So to me, like, I thought the way he was very much so like, heck yeah, we do it. We would do it, whatever we need to get this guy. And of course, we've heard Brandon Beane many times be like, we're going to do whatever it takes to win and all that kind of stuff. But to me, this was a little different. And that I really felt like he was very much so like, yeah, I would get rid of that first round pick if it meant bringing in, someone who I thought could make an impact on this team. And I think we're seeing, obviously, the Bills' name be thrown out with a whole bunch of people who might be traded. But, like, coming away from that to me was like, exclamation mark, would not be surprised at all if they end up trading away that first round pick for something, for someone. Is it to move back again? Maybe. Is it to move up? Maybe. Is there someone they'll really like? I don't know, but like that willingness is certainly there. And I think it's even, we've seen them sit back, right? Like last year they sat back, traded back. I don't know, there seemed to be something a little different to it the way he responded this year, and that to me will be something really exciting to watch, especially because they're picking so late in that first round that we know he's not going to want to do. Him just sitting there and like letting that go like seems the least likely option, and I thought that was really interesting.
And, one of the other things that he said is like, it's really hard to try to predict where the draft class is going to be at in April compared to February. They're here on a fact-finding mission, right? Like they're trying to learn as much as they can about this prospects. So what they think now, that might change by April. This is kind of doing the checks and balances, and you're going to bring 30 people to your building. You're going to go down on all these pro days. So everything's going to change. But to me, the big piece of the draft is like, and navigating this is like, when can a trade happen potentially for a player, right? Like a Myles Garrett or a Max Crosby or something like that, versus what do you need right now and how much do you like these positions? So like, that could change over the next 2 months, because the due diligence could be like, there's 3 guys that if we got him in the first round, we are running the podium and we are doing this thing and we're going to be excited about this, and we don't want a chance losing that player for a trade now. And the thing about the Browns and the Raiders specifically, I think they're going to probably stretch this process out into the summer, because they want to try to do everything they can to convince those 2 guys that they're going to be in compete mode next year, but they're not going to be. I don't think either of these teams is, especially the Raiders, who are in a division. Like, even if they like where they land at quarterback, you got to compete against the Chiefs. You got to compete against the Chargers. It's a tough division. The Denver Broncos, who I think are an upstart team as well. So I think if you're the Bills, you use the draft picks that you have right now. You take your scope and you point it towards the summer, and then even into the season. If you have to trade for a Garrett or a Crosby, maybe in season when things go bad, you have up until the trade deadline to make that kind of deal. You can still get these rookies, and then think about next year's collection of picks. Because if I'm the Browns, if I'm the Raiders, in a bad quarterback class this year, I want to try to get as much draft capital for next year as possible, and the Bills could maybe float a couple picks from next year's draft class.
And I think combining those 2 things, it's really, to me, like the other thing to take away from this, and we've seen it from the Bills in the past, but there is, while there's urgency to this offseason, and they need to get, this is a very important offseason. Like, I think we can all agree that they have to add key pieces here that weren't there last year, that kind of, they fell short. But even though we're saying that, and we're in the AFC Championship. But I will just say that, like, there is a patience kind of to it, to like kind of what you're saying, where like they're going to go through this process, and like maybe the moves fans want to see might not happen right away, but they're going to go through this, and like it might take time. And like that could be with the contract extensions. Some of those might not come till like the summer, really early in the season. That won't be surprising at all. So I think there's a patience to building this team and finding those right pieces that, like, despite the urgency of this offseason might present, with Josh Allen, going into his 8th NFL season, like, I think there is still that there. So I think that's something to keep an eye on, to keep in mind as we go through these next couple months.
I have a fun little segment that I want to end on, because non-specifically Bills related.
Nice.
But before we get there, what do you think in terms of, there's been a lot of coaching changes. What do you think has been the most substantial change from the Kansas City Chiefs game to now in terms of coaching, the moves that have happened? What's kind of stood out the most to you?
I think it's moving on from Eric Ciano. I think that, to me, he's someone who, like, being at practice every day like we are, like, he plays such a pivotal role. Like when the players are injured, like he's the one working with them to the side and kind of helping them go on that process of rehabilitating and working back. And I think like making that change was fascinating to me, because that's a huge part of this organization who's been here for many years, who they decided to move on from this offseason.
And Sean didn't really detail how it happened.
Too much into it. And I do think like Sean told us that they're in the process of interviewing. And I think where they take that role and kind of how that works, like it's someone who works really closely with the players and is a key, like a lot of players really, liked coach, liked working with him and like all this stuff. So that to me was interesting. And I think, how they choose to address that. We've heard a lot about like, their sports science stuff and wanting to keep guys healthy as possible. We've heard about Dalton Kincaid needing to add strength, things like that, where like they might want to approach the strength and conditioning in a new way. That to me is really interesting.
Do you think at all that the arrival of Ryan Nielsen, it puts Marcus West a little bit on notice? I don't know if it was necessarily, because to me it reminds me of the move for Holcomb the year before as kind of like a buffer for Bobby Babbitt at the time that was moving from safeties to linebackers.
Sure.
And I think it might have been going into his second year. I got to go back and look at it. But to me, the lack of development of some of their younger defensive linemen has been an issue. And I think Nielsen, Sean said it yesterday, specifically mentioned his ability to develop players on the defensive line. That's where he kind of made his bread in the NFL. So what do you think about that addition? And from our perspective, how awkward could that be if you're Marcus West, you were in the job for 1 year, you were an assistant before that, now they're kind of bringing in a guy that's saying, okay, let's go kind of bring in the veteran coach to kind of help push this thing along?
I think it's certainly, if he's not like, hey, what's going on, that would be weird. Like, I think it certainly does cause some attention, but kind of, I think actually back to your point where you talked about Al Holcomb being added, I think we've seen Sean McDermott, as someone who was a defensive coordinator, really like to add defensive coaches that have experience doing a variety of things and like can bring different things to the table. And that's kind of how he approaches his defensive staff. And we've seen that from a number of guys. So yes, I think it certainly doesn't put Marcus West like, hey, what's going on? Sure, of course, it's someone who's has specialized in your specialty. But to me, it's also just adding experience to this coaching staff, and like there's value in that. And also saying, I think it also genuinely just reinforces that they need to develop some of these young guys, that they really don't have a choice with that. And they're adding more talent from a coaching perspective to help with that. I don't think it necessarily is like Marcus West goes, like we're not quite there. Like to me, it's just like, okay, noted, but also just another way to help build a really important part of this team, as we're going to talk about all off season long, this defensive line.
So we're at the NFL Combine in Indy. So this is one of several off-season events, things that we do over the course of the year. What is your favorite thing to do or part of your job? Whether it be like something that you get to cover, a specific event like this that we go to. Like, what's your favorite part about being a beat reporter?
Oh, wow. I wasn't expecting that question.
I know. I had to kind of put you on the spot here.
My favorite part about my job is not these events.
Okay.
I really like these events, and I think they're a really great way. We get to talk to reporters from other teams. We get to talk to all kind of NFL personnel. It's really cool. But I personally like I'm a in-season kind of person. I really like getting to know the players and the coaches and like getting to tell like their stories. Like that's my favorite part of my job, is like getting to know the guys and like actually like building relationships and then telling cool stories. So that to me is my favorite part. And like the off-season stuff is fun, and like it's a little chiller, so that's cool. And we're busy in like a different way. It's cool to see how the team's built. But to me, it's like the relationships and like the guys' stories. Like there's so many cool people in the locker room, in the facility, that it's cool to get to know them, and that's probably my favorite part of my job.
So this is my 8th Combine, and man, it goes quick. And I will say over the year, I liked it a lot more when I was younger, because I can't hang late in the day.
He's not cool, guys. He's not cool and hip.
No, not like I used to be. And so, but my big thing is I always yearn for the part of the season that we're not in. So right now I'm like, oh, I missed the schedule of the regular season. When we get deep into the regular season, I'm kind of like, man, I can't wait for the kind of ease of the off season. So it's almost like, just enjoy the part of the season that you're in. And we got a cool job, so it's fun.
Yeah, we got some cool stuff coming up too. Like I think free agency should be really interesting how they approach that. And then the draft will be cool. Like it is cool to see. I think even more so like with this team, like it's really cool to see they don't have like big roster construction that used to be done. So to me, it's like a puzzle almost,
Right.
like how you put these pieces together is like fun to cover and all that. And like, sure, the season is nice with its schedule though, but but yeah, it's gonna be cool. I think these next couple months is gonna be really cool to see what the Bills do here.
Final thing before we get out.
Yes.
Bold prediction.
Oh my
One
gosh.
big off-season Bills
Ooh.
bold prediction. Is it one of these trades? Is it an aggressive move in the draft? Is it a specific kind of draft priority? Is it a free agent signing? What are you thinking? You know, it doesn't have to be overly spicy.
I was not prepared for this.
I know, I threw a curveball at you.
I think I think I will go spicy in the draft.
Okay.
And that they have a lot of early ammo. And that even if they like hypothetically were to trade the first round pick or whatever, I think Brandon Beane will do something to like trade up and invest, I think, in a defensive line, some sort of defensive lineman early, because I think they need to get younger at that position. And I think they know they need to, they have young talent there for sure, but I think they need, especially a defensive tackle. Like, I think they need to continue to get younger there. So to me, like, I think they'll do, I think it'll be not a calm draft, even if they do, let's say, trade the first round pick. I think they've got a lot of ammo this year, and I think Brandon Beane's going to use it.
I think one of the things that could end up unfolding is if he really likes the class at defensive tackle and he thinks he can get something similar later on, maybe that means they're a little bit more aggressive with those 3 picks in the top 60 to get up to get somebody specifically they want, whether that be a receiver, because this is a weird receiver draft. If one goes in the top 20, as this thing's going around, maybe you package 2 of those picks to get up and get the premier receiver in this draft, and then you address defensive tackle and edge later in the draft.
I agree, because I don't think they did not trade Stephon Diggs to get, and getting draft compensation for that without knowing what they would do, like not an exact plan, of course. They don't know today who they want to draft, but like knowing that you can use that ammo and that they want to get younger, that they want to have capital in the draft. I think that is something that's intentional. And so I wouldn't be surprised at all if we see something splashy in the draft.
I also thought last little bit, Brandon Beane defending Cole Bishop a little bit today, in both at the podium and then in our side conversation, basically saying that he missed the most important part of the year, which is a training camp for a rookie. He missed almost a month, or maybe a little bit more. And I think that put him behind the 8 ball. And listen, to get thrown out there in his first game and have it not go well, and the way that he adjusted and at least played pretty well. Honestly, does the conversation, I was thinking about this, does the conversation around Cole Bishop change if in the AFC Championship game, when he's in for Taylor Rapp, if he somehow comes away with that interception when he's battling against Xavier Worthy, which probably should have been incomplete pass? How are we differently talking about Cole Bishop's rookie year if he makes that big play in a big moment? Obviously, if they win, it probably changes the dynamics as well. But I think Cole Bishop was pretty solid down the stretch when he did play. And I think the expectation for a big jump in year 2 should be there.
I completely agree with you. I actually don't really understand negative conversation around Cole Bishop's rookie season. I thought he had kind of what you said, a solid rookie season when he was able to play. We heard Brandon say something today about how, like, rookie, really, you don't want to be playing safety in this defense. That's not really what this defense is built to do. We've seen experienced guys, obviously with Micah and Jordan, really succeed at safety in this defense. And I don't think at all, just because DeMar played over Cole, to me that doesn't, it's not an indictment against Cole Bishop's rookie season. And I agree. I think he could take a huge leap in year 2. And I also think, I don't think there should be like really a negative percent. Like he had a fine rookie year. Was it perfect? No. He's got some stuff to work on, but he went up. Like, I thought it improved as the year went on. And I don't, that's not a concern to me, Cole Bishop going into year 2.
Alaina Getzenberg, ESPN. You can find all of her work, ESPN.com. What's your Twitter handle?
At A Getzenberg.
There it
Lots
is.
of E's.
Yeah, I didn't want to mess that up.
He doesn't know my last name.
Just search Alaina, X, Twitter, whatever. You'll find it. Alaina Bills. And you can find all of your content there.
All of my content there. ESPN.com, and every now and then on your televisions. So.
Ooh, every once in a while. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thanks for having me.
All right, we'll see you tomorrow with more content from the Combine. I'll be back with Ryan Wednesday night. We'll see you then. Take care, everybody.